It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. Today is another edition of Frontline Friday with my very special guest, Bridget Gleason. Bridget, how are you this morning?
I am doing great. How are you, Andy?
Good. So it wouldn't be a Frontline Friday if we didn't start with a little weather update. How are things in the Bay Area?
Bay Area is beautiful today. Beautiful. We had some rain earlier in the week, but it's clear and sunny and beautiful day.
Yeah, we're here toward the end of March recording this. And New York City, it's mid-50s, sunny. Supposed to be 70 tomorrow and rainy, which feels just like spring. So I'm sure that's a sign that we have yet another snowstorm on the horizon somewhere. When it starts to feel like spring. I was talking to somebody in Denver yesterday, and a woman on my team, and it had been 70 degrees on Tuesday, and they had 17 inches of snow yesterday.
You know, I have a team in Denver also, and one of my guys there said the same thing, that 70 degrees and then a blizzard, couldn't get in. So,
oh yeah, she had like the umpteenth school day or snow day for her kids. So,
God, my kids would have loved to have been there. That's what they live for. Growing up in California, they didn't get snow days.
No snow days.
They always thought that sounded so glamorous and interesting.
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, and I just remember I think my junior year of high school is we had so many snow days. They finally had to stop letting them be snow days because the state funding equation, apparently, in terms of how many days you have to hold class to qualify for state funding. So they would just open the doors to school, and literally no one would be there except for the handful of us whose parents insisted that if school's open, you're going. So
my parents would have done the same thing.
I had several days where it was me and a few of the teachers, and that was about it at school. So anyway, so we're going to turn the tables today in this episode, where actually Bridget's going to be the one asking the questions, and together we'll be discussing the answers, but she's putting me on the spot today as opposed to me always putting her on the spot with questions.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
I love it. Thank you.
So welcome to today's edition of the Bridget Gleason Show.
Yes. Okay. Are you ready?
I am ready. Go.
Okay. So the first one, Andy, that I've been curious about is you talk to sales leaders in a variety of industries and verticals and geographies and situations. What are the most pressing things that they ask you? What trends do you see? What themes keep reoccurring? Regardless of, again, sector, geography, industry size, what do you keep hearing? What's consistent?
Well, one of the biggest issues that I hear consistently is about hiring. How do I identify and hire the best people? And it's really problematic for lots of companies. I think if you look at sort of the scale from large enterprise with a lot of process and a lot of a presumption of rigor in their hiring processes, down to smaller enterprises, that you've got this wide range, of the rigor that they apply to it. And so I see it traditionally as smaller enterprises, smaller businesses really struggle because they have a hard time putting this process into it. They tend to hire much more in emotion and somebody that just sort of feels good when they walk in. They think this person. I had one client years ago. I remember his qualification was, this is back when people dressed up to sell, is how good the person looked in a suit when they came into the office. And I said to them, I said, Art, that's not really a very reliable indicator of how well the person's going to do. And saying that gently to him at first, but he began to sort of get it, right? So it's helping people sort of stop hiring either people they just feel really comfortable with for some reason because maybe they fill a gap, or they perceive them to fill a gap in their own shortcomings, right? So a lot of times CEOs and smaller enterprises is, I'm not very good at sales. So if somebody comes in and they're really sort of, prototypically salesy, they think, that we're a compliment, so that's the type of person I want to hire. And obviously it doesn't work out very well. So what I do when I work with companies, and I know you've done this as well, is you have to, even no matter the size of the enterprise, you have to bring some degree of process, and I like to use the word rigor, to the interview process, in terms of just starting with how you screen candidates once you get the resumes on the phone, how you interview when they come in, how you validate the claims they make on the resumes, and how you really test to make sure that they have the skills and the knowledge that they claim they do, and the skills and knowledge that you know they need to have in order to be able to sell to your customers. And that's a big challenge. So I think hiring is the number one issue.
You know, it's interesting. I would agree with you. I think about I've had that issue, or that's been top of mind in any of the sales leadership roles I've had as well. And I think you can put a process in place and have this rigor, but what a lot of people struggle with, and I'd love to get your take on this as well, is what am I screening for? Mm-hmm. What are the qualities and what are the things that make someone successful here? And skill versus culture. It's interesting. I had dinner last night with the CEO of a small company and another one of the board members who's a VC here in Silicon Valley. And he advises, this company is still less than 100 people. He said, you've got to relook at your hiring every 20 people until you're about 300 to 500, and then the number goes up. But things change about every 20 when the company is small. And I thought that was also really interesting. This isn't something that you just set and forget. So here's the hiring profile, and then that's it. But how do you coach and guide leaders to come up with this profile that then they want to go screen for? How do they come up with that?
Well, that's an excellent question, because as you said, it really is a moving target. And so you really are hiring for a moment in time. I wouldn't say a moment, but a period of time, let's say. Because you and I have both been through a lot of high growth venture funded companies where we've seen that the people that came in early, some percentage of them couldn't grow with the company. And they were really good at what they did up front. And then it really felt bad having to tell these people who had made a contribution early on but weren't able to make the contribution at the next phase that they're going to have to move to a different role or sometimes even transition out of the company. And so you're absolutely right that it's sort of you have these phases. And to me, one of the real critical things to do is to not, depending on the position, is especially in sales, is don't overhire early on. And so what I mean by that is a lot of times, especially in smaller companies, is the first tendency is when they're scaling sales is let's hire a VP of sales. And to me, that's not a good idea, right? So what I want to do is I want to find somebody that's an individual contributor up front that's going to go out and actually make the calls that need to be made. Because a lot of times you hire somebody that's in a management role, what they want to do is they want to build a structure because that's what they've been trained to do. Right. But what I want to do is I want to build a process. I want to see how we actually sell this, who buys it. And I remember reading the story, which I presume is sort of apocryphal in its nature, but it talked about a landscape architect that was hired to design a green space for a university. And he comes in and spends months moving dirt around and plants and grass planting and so on. And the day comes for the big reveal, and the administrators come out and they look at this beautiful green space, and somebody says, well, there's one problem. There's no sidewalks here. And the landscape architect said, well, we're going to wait and see where the students walk for a year, and then we're going to put sidewalks there. And so for me, that's sort of how you determine, how you hire somebody is, or who you're hiring at the right time is, see where the people walk first, right? See what your customers are doing. See what you're actually selling. And that's going to give you an indication of the type of people you need to hire and when. And so I think that's really...
I love that analogy. I mean, that story about the landscape architect and seeing where people walk first, I think is very apt and appropriate in this situation.
Because we see this all the time where people hire the wrong person for the job, and they may outwardly have some of the skills And it may be through no fault of their own, but they just end up not being a match for what you end up selling. Because as you're in early stage companies, the target sometimes changes. Not sometimes, it always changes, right? You have a vision of what it is you're selling up front, but once you actually get out in the market and see what people are willing to buy and what they're willing to pay for it, that can change.
Yeah, it does change. I would completely agree with that. I also tell VPs of sales and actually CEOs who I advise that they kind of need to get comfortable with that it may take a few versions of let's say a sales leader over a period of time, because the company's changing, the product's changing, and they shouldn't consider that a failure or abnormal. It would be very unusual, I think, to be able to find a sales leader early on, let's say when the company is, sub 30 employees, that's going to be able to stay with you to 300. There's so many changes, and not that many people can grow and adapt just as the company does that, and that's okay.
Yeah, well, I look at myself. I mean, when I was in those venture funded companies and those startups, yeah, I was the 0 to 50 sales guys manager. Yeah, that's what I specialized in. A lot of times I came into companies that sort of stalled out and really needed to be able to create some momentum back in the marketplace. Like the investors were pretty antsy about it, and I could do that, and that was my strength. And building up that initial team, making that happen, being very focused, capturing big deals. We need to capture big deals to really do the sort of step function and growth in the company. But when it really became really process laden, I wasn't the guy, mostly because I sort of think I got bored by that and was looking for that next early stage thing to do. But there's someone better qualified at that point. So everybody has their own stages that they're really good at.
Well, and I think it's important to know what you're good at and have a good, healthy appreciation of your strengths and also your limitations.
Well, I think it's an important lesson for people that are listening to this. They're saying, look, maybe looking for that next opportunity, as we do in sales and our careers, is that if you really know what you're good at, then it becomes much easier to be the candidate that people are interviewing, because you've got that enthusiasm, that passion for that particular thing. And if you try to position yourself as all things for all people, or you're all things for all stages, it doesn't come across as credible.
Right. Okay, so Andy, now another question.
Sure.
What questions should they be asking that they don't ask
when they're interviewing?
No. Just when you go and are talking to sales leaders across the country, industry
right.
geographies, et cetera. So they often ask about hiring.
Yeah.
Is there anything that they don't ask that you're struck by, wow, this isn't on their radar and should be?
Yeah, it's one topic you and I have talked about before, and it's really about sales productivity. Is that I think that people have a very imperfect understanding of what that is. And so you and I have talked about this, and maybe people remember as we've talked, is that sales productivity really boils down to the end of the day is, you're a salesperson, you have so much time you can sell. So you have to measure productivity in sales like you measure productivity in the economy in general, which is what's your unit of output for, unit of input that's invested. So what's, how many dollars do you produce on a manufacturing line based on, one investment of an hour of labor? Well, similarly in sales is at the end of the day, your productivity is all about how many dollars are you selling, or revenue, how much revenue you're generating dollar-wise per hour of sales time. And sales leaders don't understand this, because they tend to think that, as long as people are making quota, they're being productive. And to me, that's a performance indicator, but it has nothing to do with productivity. Somebody could be making quota, but not be very productive with their time. And so if you could improve their productivity in terms of how much dollars they're selling per hour of actual sales time, then you begin to see a real difference in terms of what you're truly capable of as an organization.
Why do you think that's overlooked? Why doesn't that come up? It seems
I think
it
it'll
seems
come to
somewhat-
the fore as we get more, now we're getting so much more data, right, into sales, because all the technologies that exist to capture various aspects of our sales process. And I think that as we get more and more data, more and more people will get into that. I was fortunate early in my career to be in a situation where I was getting that data. It was being manually collected. But I worked in environments where, in a couple companies, or more than a couple companies, where we had to track all of our hours. Now think about that. I mean, as salespeople, you had to know, you had to tell me, you had to tell the company, we all had to tell the company how we spent basically every minute of our day. And there was
I
some.
remember that. I had that.
Yeah, but we actually turned in time cards.
Do you know, it was so funny. We were joking here on my team the other day about time cards and about, because we were talking about productivity and how people are spending their time. So you reminded me of that also, that, we had to account for all of our time.
Well, but in our case, what we did is we not only had to account for the time, but given that these companies also did defense business on one hand, is we had basically job numbers that were assigned to, in our case, to various large customer prospects we were working on and so on. So I knew as a manager, I was getting reports telling me basically how much time people are spending on all these various prospects. So I knew to the hour, how much time that it took to move the prospect from initial point of interest to closing a deal. And that is true sales productivity. So if I could look at two people and say, look, they're each closing $1 million piece of business, but one guy was spending twice the number of hours. Well, what's the difference between the two? Was it purely the prospect, or what were they doing themselves that was different? And then that became something you could start, teaching and importing to other people, or exporting, to other people on the team. And so that, I've always had that finite view of what productivity is, very discrete view of what it is. And I think once people begin to sort of latch onto that as a measurement tool, then we're going to see some real changes in how productive people can actually be, because it's really focusing on what you're doing with every minute of time that you're interacting with the prospect is one, as well as time involved with producing proposals and so on and so forth. I mean, that's time you're investing in that prospect as well. And technology that we're seeing coming on stream certainly helps with a lot of those functions. So we should be seeing already productivity improving, because it doesn't take as much time to put together a contract. It doesn't take as much time for a contract to be reviewed oftentimes, given that we're using things like DocuSign and so on, where really don't lend themselves in a lot of cases to people marking up the contracts, right?
So, Andy, with all of these tools to help salespeople be more productive, and there are tons of them. I worked for Yesware, which was one such tool.
Yes.
So here are all these things that are being created to help sales reps be more productive. Are they more productive?
I don't think so. I think not. And I think that part of what we're seeing culturally within sales is this a real sort of tectonic shift that we really haven't had before, because there have been sort of slow introduction of technologies into the sales process, but now we're seeing a lot of new technologies come on stream and available to companies, not just tech companies, but anybody that's selling. I think it's fundamentally going to change how sales is taking place, and in a way that ultimately it will drive productivity, because what's going to happen is we're going to have to flush some of these old myths about how sales takes place. And I'll just give you an example. I mean, one prevalent thing that still so drives me nuts is that salespeople have, and I've written about this, salespeople have this conception that, well, geez, if I give a prospect a proposal, I'm going to give them 3 or 4 days to look at that, and then I'll get back to them. And it's like, really? Why? I mean, if you've been doing your job, the proposal is no surprise to the prospect. You should have gone through that with them verbally before you even sent it to them. And you could certainly, do that through a collaboration tool that exists or whatever. Is that, you don't need to give them 4 days. That's myth. That's right. That's this, I call it the indecent interval that people build into their selling. And I think technology is going to enable us to get rid of some of these old myth things, because people are going to be able to look at things, review things more in real time. If you've, collaborated with them the way you're supposed to be collaborating with the prospect through the sales process, the proposal, like I said, isn't a surprise. It's just putting down on paper what you've already told them.
I love that. What did you call it? The indecent
interval, yeah.
The indecent interval. I'm going to use that. The indecent interval. The pushback I get from my team when I talk about you shouldn't ever give a prospect a proposal until you've reviewed it with them, and there's with certainty. I shouldn't say with certainty. 80% chance that they will accept it. You feel good about it. That was always the percentage that we used.
Right.
And that there seems to be more resistance to connections and conversations when the sales rep's pushing for it. When they're trying to get these meetings, they're trying to have this conversation there. And in some cases, I feel that they haven't done a good job controlling the sales process, et cetera. In some cases, it seems like they've done a pretty good job. But customers and prospects have so much more access to information. They don't need the sales rep. Mm-hmm. They don't need the sales rep as much. They can do a lot of the assessment on their own.
Right.
And it makes me think, kind of back to this question about, are sales reps more productive? I mean, we've got all the tools to make them more productive. Are they more productive? It's tools in and of themselves are not the things that are going to drive productivity, but it's the process and how we use them that's going to make the difference. And I think with the prevalence of all these new tools, we probably haven't fully figured out how to incorporate them into a sales process to kind of get to this balance of tools and technology and process to make reps truly more productive.
Oh, I agree. And that's why I was sort of referring to it as this tectonic shift, because I think it is, things are really shaking right now, right? And there's a lot of change in sales process. Look at the whole sales development model that SaaS companies are using and so on. We've talked about this. That's going to change. That the way it is today and the way it's being implemented is, in my mind, isn't sustainable. It's going to evolve to something that is better, that's a little more emphasized on quality over quantity, because right now it seems purely, lip service notwithstanding, purely a quality play, or quantity play, excuse me. So yeah, I think it is. I think we're going to see, I think it's going to be one of the big changes over the next 5 years in sales is, just as you said, is how do we optimally blend the process and the technologies together to accomplish the primary task, which is to help the customer make a decision. It's not to sell something, it's to help the customer make a decision. And if we can reach that, then I think productivity is going to increase.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. The last question I want to ask, and this is one that also came up in this dinner I had last night, that this VC was saying that he sees the most vexing, difficult issue that sales leaders of his portfolio companies have is around designing comp plans that really do what they want the company to do, that are motivating. And he's been in the business for a long time. And he just said designing a good comp plan, he's always just found very, very challenging, and he hears that as a struggle.
Yes.
What would you say about that? What is your comment? Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. It's always a struggle. And I think in the world that the investor operates in, it's made more difficult by the fact that, again, just as I said, is that so many of the sales models are predicated on quantity versus quality. And you have this inherent conflict, is that on one hand you want to incent people to, make the number of contacts they need to make and make the number of calls they need to make, but those don't necessarily align with the way the customer wants to buy. Mm-hmm. And so at some point you have to be able to reconcile that. And I think that is the big problem in that space. I think otherwise, as people, what the big problem I see with the enterprise I deal with is it's so top down that they don't. I think when you design a comp plan, yeah, you can start with the top down goal, but then you have to look at your plan and build it from bottom up and say, is there inherent logic in here? Does the logic all fit together? Because the problem I see is, a top-down goal will be unrealistic on the face of it. And then you can design any comp plan you want, and if the top-down goal is just unrealistic, you can motivate.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You can motivate everything you want, but it's just not going to happen the way you want. So you really have to align, how the customer is buying, how they want to buy, what you want the customer to buy, and be very realistic about how you reconcile that with what your top line goals are.
Yeah, you and I could spend an entire session on comp plans. That seems to be it's a hot topic. It's a big topic. It's one that is really important for a company to get right, a sales leader to get right. Sales reps want it to be right, and to have that alignment is, I think, really, really challenging.
It is. And why don't we do that? We'll spend a future episode. We'll talk about comp plans. I'm sure people would like to hear about that. So, but for today, I think that was the last question. We're running a little short today because both you and I are sort of pressed for time with something coming up. But we'll be back next Friday with a new episode of Frontline Friday with my special guest, Bridget Gleason, who was the host of the show today. And thank you very much for the questions.
And I like Turn the Tables.
Okay, we'll do it again.
So anytime we want to do that, I love Turn the Tables, Andy. It was interesting for me as well.
All right, well, good. Well, again, thanks everybody in the audience. Friends, thanks for listening, and we'll look forward to talking to you next Friday. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.